Hello and welcome to Green Shift Business Line's video series on clean tech. I'm your host M Ramesh. In today's video, we want to take a close look at the new nuclear law that the government has brought in, called the Shanti Act. Shanti stands for Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India. The act is both epochal and transformative because it opens up the nuclear energy industry for private sector participation for the first ever time in India. The Shanti Act replaces the two erstwhile nuclear legislations, namely the Atomic Energy Act of 1962 and the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act, or the CLND Act of 2010. The Shanti Act can be summarized in 3 points. First, it allows private sector companies to own and operate nuclear power plants. Second, it makes some changes in the law pertaining to the nuclear power plant operators' liability in case of a nuclear mishap. Third, it gives statutory status to the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, AERB, which till the Shanti Act came was a part of the Atomic Energy Commission under the Prime Minister's office. Now let us look at each of these points in some detail. First, let us take up the point about the law opening up the nuclear energy industry for private sector participation. Today, India has a meager 8,780 megawatts of nuclear power capacity, of which 2,000 were built by the Russian company Rosatom. The Government of India owned Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL, has just built about 6,780 megawatts of capacity in the last 70 years of independent India. Now, the government has set India a target of 100 gigawatts to be achieved by 2047. This would call for an investment of something like 15 lakh crores. Obviously, the government alone cannot do this. The private sector had to be brought in. Here, as an aside, let me dwell a little on the point of target setting. India's nuclear power capacity targets have been swinging so wildly that in some sense it has lost a little bit of seriousness. First, the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh fixed a target of 35 gigawatts for 2022 and 60 gigawatts for 2032. Then, under the new government, the target was revised to 63 gigawatts for 2032. This target was mentioned by Minister Jitendra Singh in the Parliament as lately as on April 28, 2016, in a reply to a Rajya Sabha question. However, the target was revised downwards to 22,480 megawatts or 22.48 gigawatts for 2031-32. And now, the government is speaking in terms of 100,000 megawatts or 100 gigawatts for 2047. So who knows? The 2047 target of 100 gigawatts may still change. We don't know. But as things stand today, that is the target on the table. And to achieve that, there is no option but to get private sector participation. And hence, this law opens up the sector for private sector investments. After all, the private sector is also very keen on setting up a series of small modular reactors, SMRs, which many Indian companies have expressed interest in doing that. And so it is only appropriate to allow them to go ahead with the plans. The second point is about nuclear liability. This has been rather a controversial point. The government has been roundly criticized for this, both in the parliament and outside the parliament. So let us take a close look at what exactly it is all about, to what extent are the criticisms valid, what exactly has changed between the old CLND Act and the new Shanti Act. The government has been criticized for letting the plant equipment supplier off the hook in case a nuclear mishap happens. However, a close look at the Shanti Act shows that nothing much has changed really in material terms. To understand this, let us take a look at what the previous act said and what this act says now. Actually, if a nuclear mishap happens, from the victim's point of view, it is always and only the plant operator who has to pay the damages. For example, if it is Nuclear Power Corporation of India, who is the plant operator, then it is only Nuclear Power Corporation of India, or NPCIL, who has to pay damages to the affected people. There is no change in this principle at all. There is no difference between the old CL&D Act and the new Shanti Act in what the maximum liability of the operator is, except there is one small difference. The old law capped the liability at 1,500 crores, whereas the new law, the Shanti Act, says the smaller the reactor, the smaller the liability. The highest liability is 3,000 crores for reactors bigger than 3,600 megawatts. For reactors of sizes between 1,500 megawatts and 3,600 megawatts, the liability is the same as the old act, which is 1,500 crores. And then it goes on tapering like that. It is all mentioned in the second schedule of the act, which basically says the smaller the reactor, the smaller the liability. So on this point of operator's liability, nothing has changed much from the plant operator's perspective, excepting that the government has, because of the new interest in SMRs, thought it fit to make it that smaller the reactor, smaller the liability. There is really no material change. Now the controversial point is what happens to the equipment supplier. It could be somebody like Hitachi, Westinghouse, GE, these people. Now this has been so controversial because it is generally believed that Section 17 of the CL&D Act sort of scared away foreign investors, and that is why no foreign investor has come into the Indian nuclear power sector. So what has changed? The big difference between the old and the new laws is where it pertains to whether the operator can be reimbursed, that is, right to recourse, reimbursed by the equipment supplier or not. So, from the victim's point of view, there is absolutely no change. It is always and only the plant operator who has to pay damages. And the government had earlier fixed a cap on the maximum liability of the plant operator. Again, in the new act, there is a cap on the maximum liability. So, from the victim's point of view, this is a very crucial difference, crucial nuance to note. From the victim's point of view, from the people's point of view, there is absolutely no change between the old act and the new act. The only difference is what happens to the power plant operator, whether he can get reimbursed by the equipment supplier or not. Now, the old act said, but Section 17 of the old CL&D Act allowed the operator to put a clause in the agreement with the supplier, giving him, that is, giving the operator the right to recourse or the right to be reimbursed, and then also claim the reimbursement. The new law has left this open completely. Completely left it to the operator to deal with the supplier. After all, they are private sector players, they are private companies. It is up to them to negotiate and make a proper agreement. So it's been, the government has said, okay, leave it. There is again no bar on a plant operator to seek a right to recourse from the supplier in the agreement with the supplier. So in effect, nothing much has changed in terms of nuclear liability. So the controversy has rather been political, it's not material. The third thing the Shanti Act does is to give statutory powers to the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, AERB, which, as I said earlier, used to be under the Atomic Energy Commission, which in turn used to be under the Prime Minister's office. Now, it has statutory status, which means that it is accountable only to the parliament. The AERB will now have powers to frame rules and regulations and get them approved by the parliament. It is also accountable to the parliament. This is a very welcome move because when you have multiple players, earlier there was only NPCIL. In future, it looks like there will be many players. In that context, you need a strong, technically qualified regulator, and that is what the AERB is supposed to be. Earlier, the criticism against the board was that it had no teeth. Now it has been given powers. So it is now an independent regulator, and that is a very welcome feature of the new act. Now there are a few additional points that one needs to note about this act. One very crucial, very important point is that the government has kept for itself the right to fix tariffs for the electricity generated by nuclear power plants. The act also sets up a council called the Atomic Energy Redressal Advisory Council, which, as the name suggests, is an advisory council. So, if somebody is aggrieved by the tariff fixed by the government, that entity can go to this council and appeal. The council will then try to facilitate discussion between the entity and the government, but the council does not have any powers to overrule the tariff fixed by the government. It's a very important point to note. So, the government still keeps a right to design a formula which will be applied for fixing tariffs. We'll have to wait and see how the private sector takes this point. Will it be a deterrent? Will it deter investments into the sector? We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. So there you are. We have a nice new modern nuclear legislation for India, the Shanti Act. It is expected, there are some reports that say, rather optimistically perhaps, that this act can pave the way for something like $200 billion of investments into the sector. So, we are in for very exciting times. Thank you.